There is a transactional form of communication where that's also that pretty much the same method, but then you have the noise is more of all of the environment around you. So the children being in a daycare setting, there is constantly all sorts of literal and metaphorical noise all of the time. So listening is tough, but it's still nonetheless important. When you're listening to others, there's the difference between hearing and listening. You can hear somebody say something, and then you just kind of blank, like, okay, cool. But when you're listening is more actively involved, and you can even often repeat what they're saying. You can not return it, but reiterate what they're saying. You can say it back. Excuse me. That's part of mindful listening, being aware of what's going on and just being actively there. It's very important in all relationships across all spectrums. Have mindful listening is pivotal to a successful relationship of all kinds, whether it be bosses, coworkers, children, relationships that are with your partners or family members or whatever. Being actively involved shows that you're engaged, that you value what's going on, that you are vested in the issue or whatever. One of the examples in the book is saying that it was I think a couple that were the ones said to the guy, and a lot of the issues or a lot of the examples are typically of a woman expressing her emotions or feelings more adequately and properly, and then the guy just kind of blowing it off or whatever. So one of the examples was that it just said that I love you, and the guy's watching TV and he's just staring at the TV and just like, I love you too. That's at least how I picture it. They're just staring off, just yeah. That's not really mindful listening. That's hearing, and then you just repeat it because you're just saying what you think they want to say instead of turning your attention to them and fully engaging this process so that it can go back and forth. So then, speaking of relationships, that how we form them, how I mentioned earlier that a child walking into a classroom sees another child with the same animal, dinosaur, on their shirt. They immediately form a relationship from that. That they like the same thing I like. Awesome. There we go. Perfect. And so that's appearance similarities that, we build relationships on appearance. We build relationships on similarities. So those kind of go hand in hand for that example. But if the one child likes to play with blocks and another child likes to play with Legos, I mean, it's two types of blocks, but one's a big block and the one's Legos. Well, then they could compromise, and if they needed to play or wanted to play together, maybe one was playing alone and the other one just showed up. Well, I'll go try out these blocks. Relationship is formed. They're building. They could be tiny engineers one day, or they'll adult engineers, but at the moment they're tiny engineers. So then we also have relationships that are complementary. So the idea that opposites attract. I've seen this to be true. I know this to be true. It's not 100% in every case, but there's some underlying factor that's maybe this functions this way and this functions this way. They just so happen to function together. People on teams, work groups, think groups, those sorts of things. A lot of times they will put people together who may or may not be similar and having the same work ethic or qualities or characteristics or whatever, but knowing that they can, how one works in a situation, how it might be complementary to another to have a better end result. So then those parts of relationships, that how they are formed, there's kind of a lengthy process to it that the book outlines, but it's pretty simple. There's a common something, you build on that, something happens, it could become stagnant, and then it could fall apart, the relationships. It's not always true, but relationships are ever changing. They're constant. It's not going to stay one way the whole time. there are any number of outside factors between this part of the relationship and this part of the relationship, or something might happen if it's a couple that they go through buying a house together, or a puppy, or having a child, or some major life event. A relative speaks up about feeling a certain way, or whatever. For children, it's literally as simple as a shared experience, something like having a dinosaur on their shirt. Then all of a sudden later they're playing blocks, building together. One of them gets hurt with a block that the other one threw for whatever reason. Relationship's over. It's done. And 9.5 times out of 10, that relationship is back together in about 30 or 45 minutes. It's about all it takes for a child, anyway, or specifically talking 3 to 5. It'll probably be longer, older they get, because they can actually decide that maybe this isn't the best. Maybe, this person hurt me once, maybe they can hurt me twice. That's just learning, that's moving on with the situation. So then with relationships, we also have confirming and disconfirming climates. And so confirming relational climates would be ones that show value. Disconfirming is the ones that are like a lack of regard entirely. It may not be throughout the relationship. It may just be a situation that shows that they have value or they're vested in this person, and there's also times when they're not. So with children, I've seen often that if children are the two children that have the dinosaurs on their shirt, that are friends, one of them gets hurt, the other one may go over to the first one and say something, ask them what happened, try to console them, maybe try to help make them feel better by giving them a hug or something like that. That's kind of a confirming relational climate. Then disconfirming would be, if something happened and they just kind of went on about their own business, they're done. But it's harder to describe that with children because it is such a static kind of mindset for them. There's different methods that they can. Different methods that they would react to each other if they're in a communication, if they're in a conflict, or if they're discussing something, or if they're playing, even something as simple as interrupting the other child, or taking the other child's toy, or just if they're playing and then the one walks off and plays with something totally different. Those are disconfirming climates, and typically, as adults, we want to avoid those situations, or we want to maybe not necessarily avoid them, but if those come up and those, we try to remedy that. We try to stay clear of that. We value more confirming climates, and we want to have more positive experiences with all relationships. Just that's an innate thing that we don't want to be in negative relationships. We want the best that we can get, and so that's where we just innately strive for that. Being empathetic is important for this, and just showing a need for another person, a general concern for other people. This would be hugely important when it comes to managing conflict. If the child that the children that are best friends, or for that day they're best friends, they have the dinosaur shirts on, that they get into some sort of argument or disagreement or whatever. Kid throws a block, even accidentally hits him, makes him upset. Showing empathy, showing that they want to go over, and help console them, help make sure that things are okay, is a type of managing the conflict. Showing that there's more equality there than one being right or one being wrong, or saying that, well, you threw this block, therefore, I can't be your friend anymore, even if it was you threw that block to try to hit that bug over there that was coming after me. You threw the block and it hit me, so that's how it works. It's different for children, and I'm only mildly struggling to put all this into perspective for that. It's a work in progress, and it's it's fun to try to put that to the test for where I work. For me specifically, it's fun, and I intend to try to build some sort of training or some sort of presentation for my staff that are younger, that haven't been doing this for as long as I have. You know, I've worked with children for going on 17 years now, and I understand these things. I know these things. I know communication. I but it's never ending. Like I say that I know it, but I know that I'm never gonna know it all, and that's knowing. I think knowing and understanding that is helpful for me, but it's yeah, it's always changing. The way we communicate, if we're communicating face to face, if we're communicating over a Zoom meeting now, if we're communicating through text message, or kids who are communicating through iPads, or if they're non-verbally communicating by their gestures, or how they're standing, or what they're wearing, or all of these different levels of communication are they're ever changing. They're constantly ever changing, and it's just increasingly becoming more and more, in my opinion, ambiguous how we are to decipher these messages, because there are so many different ways of doing that who's to say what's the right way and what's not the right way. But I think that's also the beautiful thing about it, is that once you know these concepts and these ideas of how people react, how people interact, levels of conflict, if it's complementary, if it's the congruent conflict styles, if there's knowing how people react emotionally, knowing their feelings, being empathetic to one another, listening, mindful listening, having just that complete attention on what's going on, and knowing what's happening and around you, and or specifically in your relationships, and how you're communicating with them, that is the most important. So when we're teaching these children, as I often do, I don't tell them the right way or the wrong way. I don't tell them that they're doing it wrong. I give them acknowledgement. I give them positive reinforcements. I give them recognition about how they're doing things right. Now, if they're doing it wrong, you don't say that you're doing it wrong, or this is how you're doing it wrong. It's how you word it. It's the language you choose, that you say that let's try it this other way, because maybe this is going to be more helpful for you, or for your relationship, or for the two boys playing with the or not, maybe not even boys, for the two children playing with the blocks, that with the dinosaur shirts, it's just the situation that they were in at that time, and it's going to be impossible to recreate that and try to move on from it. But you take every moment as it is, and you learn from it, and you expand on it where you can, in your own perception of things and self-concept, and and you just go from there. So I do think that this book and class has been quite an eye-opener, I guess, for some of the specifics and textbook terminology for how to deal with these things, and how to put words to things, and how to explain what they are. Whether or not I understood them, I didn't know necessarily what to call them. And that's probably, in my opinion, the biggest factor with language and communication, is when we don't communicate the same thing. The message isn't the same. It's lost somewhere in translation. It's somehow they decode the message differently, or incorrectly, or however it may be. That's probably the most important part of communicating, is being able to convey our message effectively. And if we can't do that, or if we convey an inappropriate message, or if it's inappropriate, might not be the right word, but if it's not what we meant to express, if you decipher the message or decode the message differently than I meant it to be, then I'm at fault here, because I didn't express not express. Well, I guess we'll express. I didn't give the message correctly. I didn't send it correctly.